The South African Heart Association says diabetes and cardiovascular disease are burdening South Africa's healthcare system. It's estimated that nearly 20 million people die of cardiovascular diseases worldwide every year. Professor Eric Klug, President of the Heart Association in our country, is joining us now for more. Prof, good afternoon. Welcome to today, and thank you very much for your time. Just yesterday, the world was marking Diabetes Day, and then today we're speaking about diabetes-linked cardiovascular disease burden. How big is it in our country?
It's a major burden in South Africa, and it's an increasing burden, similar to the rest of the world. So about, you could say, 13% of the South African population are diabetic. And that comes to about, close to 5-6 million diabetics in South Africa. And the important thing is that most of them aren't diagnosed. So, a lot of patients aren't aware that they are diabetic.
Yeah, I think it was in October last month, just the other day, you held what you call the cardiac collaboration, which is where you bring together everybody, especially in your space, of cardiologists, leading cardiologists, and researchers. What was the main consensus? What came out of that?
It was the SA Heart Annual Congress, and we made it a collaborative congress. So we invited other disciplines, including endocrinology. And so the diabetologists or the endocrinologists, specialist physicians in diabetes, they attended. And the important thing was that, one, there was announced the South African guidelines, which is a guideline recommended to practitioners in South Africa on how to diagnose and manage diabetes. And then that was important to go through, and that's going to be published soon. And then we discussed how it's important to collaborate between cardiologists, endocrinologists, government, funders, and the public.
Yeah, in this diabetic-related cardiovascular disease, drugs alone, medicine alone is not the solution, is it?
Correct. It's essentially there's two types of diabetes. So the one type of diabetes, which is majority the young people, they develop diabetes usually in young adulthood, and that is an autoimmune condition where they make antibodies to their own pancreas and destroy it. That's not a lifestyle disease. But the second type of diabetes, which is far more common, far more prevalent, that's associated with majority lifestyle issues.
Yeah, so it's a lifestyle, and from a collaborative effort, what do you foresee going forward? I mean, your theme for this year's annual conference that you've just had was the cardiac collaboration. That tells me, and you did invite other specialists to be part of your discussions. Going forward, what are the areas for collaboration, especially in our country, as we continue this battle against this non-communicable disease?
Very important, Dan. And we did also we had a whole session involving government and funders, and we discussed their patient advocacy groups to create. We don't have good patient advocacy groups in South Africa, and it's one of the tasks of SA Heart to establish that in the cardiovascular arena for patients to have a voice. But importantly, the government has enacted legislation. In 2018, they had the Health Promotions Levy, which is taxing sugar in foods, and it's an incremental tax that the more sugar there is in a food, the higher the tax that's paid. And in 2023, also in April, a very important legislation on labeling food and the rules of advertising. But on the back of the food, you can see all this detailed ingredients of the food that you're buying, but often it makes no sense. They have now enacted for the front of the food, the packaging, to have these illustrative logos that are easy to understand. So it's going to be important to, one, educate people in South Africa what are sort of toxic foods, what are foods that are high in sugar. We have to educate our population about exercise. We have to educate our population about obesity. Obesity is burgeoning. South African women, the percentage that are obese in South Africa, obese and overweight, are close to over 50%. For men, it's about 30% that are overweight and obese. And then children, young adolescents, we have an incidence of over 10% of diabetes in that population group. of being overweight and obese in that population group. And those are all risk factors for the development of this predominantly lifestyle-related diabetes, but there's a strong genetic element. So if someone in your family is diabetic, the chances are you developing the same diabetes condition are much higher.
Yeah, no, Prof, and hopefully the message will go through. I mean, we need to step up the awareness, especially, as you say, around education. I'm sure we'll talk in the near future. Thank you very much for your time, Professor Eric Klug. He's, of course, from the South African Heart Association. He's the president of that, talking about this very important lifestyle disease. Diabetes is called a silent killer. And then, of course, when you intersect it with cardiovascular challenges, it becomes a very deadly cocktail. Thank you very much, Prof.